Hello everyone. In the last video we talked about how to create classes and how to create objects in Python, and we talked about what is instance variable. So let's revise. So in Python I can define a class using this class keyword and I will specify this class name. I can define an entire structure using methods. So in Python, if I want, every object should have a set of variables, and that instance variable I can define inside any method. Okay, so the restriction I have here is it should be inside at least one method. It cannot be outside of this method. Okay, so it's not mandatory that it should be inside only init method. It can be in any other method also, but it should be inside a method. So if I want to define a particular variable as a private, that means I want to restrict the access outside the class, then I should put double underscore at the start of the variable. How to create objects? So you will define an object name, then the class name, and if you want to initialize it to a particular state, then I can pass on these values. So whenever you create an object, it will give a call to your init method. And this is how I can use this init method to initialize the instance variable which I'm creating. Okay, so next thing we'll discuss is class variable. So if I define any variable outside of all the methods, then that particular variable will become a class variable. So now let's say I want to maintain the total number of customers. I want to maintain the count of that. If I define a variable outside of this methods, then now across all the instances I will have a single value for this count variable. So the standard way of accessing your class variable is using your class name. So now if I check the value for count using a count, then I will get the updated count. Okay, so what I want, every time I create an object, my count value should increment. Okay, so when I create an object, it is defaultly giving a call to init method. So I am writing a logic to increment the value of this count variable inside this init method. That means now every time I create a new object, it will increment the value for this count variable. So how to access this class variable? So you have to access it using your class name and then the variable name. So I'm saying account.count plus equals to 1. So now here let's say we have created 4 objects. So here if I say print account.count, and if I execute this, it will show me the count value as 4. So let me comment out this part. Okay, now let's see if I can get this value using object. I'm saying okay, customer 1 dot count. I'm still able to see the same value, that is 4. That means across all the instances, now the value for this count variable will be same. So if I increment a value using this class name here, if I say account.count plus equals to 5, let's say, and now if I execute all these statements again, it will increment the count value for all the instances. Okay, so if I'm able to print the value of this count variable using object also, let's see what will happen if I try to modify the value using object. So here we modified using class name and then the variable name. Now I am writing okay, customer 1 dot count is equal to, let's say, 100. Okay, and now let's say print the result, same thing. So before this the value was 9 for the count variable. After that I'm changing it to 100. So now if you see the execution for customer 2.count, it is still showing me value 2. For customer word.count, it is showing value 100, and account.count still holding the value 9. Okay, so how it works in Python? So if you want to modify the value of a class variable, that means if you want to modify the value across all the instances, then your only way to modify the value using your class name. So when you modify the class variable using your class name, it will update the value across all the instances. But if you try to update the value using object, Python will not throw you an error message. But what it will create a new variable called count in the namespace of this object customer. Okay, so here before executing this statement, if I comment this and if I say print account dot underscore underscore dict, so I'm trying to access the namespace for this class. So here you will see this count value is 9. Okay, if I try to print the namespace value for the object customer1 dot underscore underscore dict, and if I execute this, let's comment out the class part. Okay, so we only have ID, name and balance. We don't have this count variable. Okay, but now if I update the value using object, and now if I check the namespace for that particular object, it will create a local variable in the namespace for that particular object and it will set the value. That means you are not actually changing the global value. Okay, so the only way to modify this global value is using your class name. Okay, so this is the concept of class variables. So if you define any variable outside all the methods, defaultly it will become a class variable. Now Python provides a special method, that is your class method. So if you want to work on with all your object variables, then I can define a class method for that. Okay, so here I'm defining a class method just to increment the value of count. So how to define a class method? So I need to write something called decorator. So I'm putting this at the rate. So we'll be covering decorator in a separate video. So for now, just remember the syntax. So I'm saying at the rate, and then I need to write class method, and I need to write this statement just before the function name. So I'm defining new function. Let's call it as increment count. So in case of instance method, we passed self as the first argument, that is the instance. Okay, but in case of a class method, the first argument will be the class itself. Okay, so reference to the class. So this is the difference between your class method and the instance method. So for the instance method, the first parameter will be self, that means the instance. But here the first parameter will be CLS, that means it's a reference to the class. So if I want to access any variables here, so I will say CLS dot count plus equals 1. So inside a class method, now I don't have access to any of this instance variable. Okay, so I have a clear separation between the manipulation of instance variable and the class variable. So here if I want to increment the count, so now instead of directly accessing this, I am writing this call to the method. I am saying increment count. Okay, I am writing same method again just to get the value again. So I'm saying at the rate of class method definition of get underscore count CLS, and this will just return me the current value of count. So CLS dot count. Okay, so how you will access this method? So you will access these methods using your class name. So if I want to get the value of count, I'll say account dot get count. Now it will show me 4. So every time I create an object, it will go to init. It will give a call to this method, that is increment count, which is actually working with a class variables count, and then I'm printing the value using this get count method. Okay, So you just have to use this decorator @ of class method. Now Python provides one more type of method, and that is your static method. So what is static method? So I will define it as @static method. So we have seen for instance method, we are working with instance variable and I'm passing the instance as the first argument. In case of a class method, we are passing the CLS. In case of static method, we will not pass any extra parameter. Okay, so I am just writing this a very basic function print val. So if I want to pass 3 values to this function, I will accept 3 values. I will not add extra parameter like CLS and the self. So it provides a proper namespace separation that if I have something to work on with objects or instance, I will define an instance method. If I have something to work on with class variables, I will create a class method. And if I have something completely independent which is not accessing the class variables and the instance variable also, then generally you will define it as a static method. Okay, so here I'm just writing a call to a print statement. Let's call it as static method in account class. Okay, so how you will access this method? So in order to access this method also, you don't have to create an object. So you will directly access this particular method using class name. So now if I say account.printval, it will print me the print message which I'm writing into that method. Okay, so we have a namespace separation between instances, between class variables, and apart from that, if we have something completely independent, that we will be defining in a static method. So in static method, we will not be accessing the class variables and the instance variables. Okay, so that's all about class variable and a class method in Python. In the next video, we will talk about inheritance in Python. Thank you.